It's 8:51 p.m. on December 18th, 2020, and I just finished reading the opinion for Trump versus New York, and I think I just paid a tax. I think that's part of what happened, but it was a very emotional and very intense, and I will respond as appropriate in a legal, specific, formal manner. But I need to acknowledge that when I found out about that case, I was not certain what was really being addressed. But I did something completely independent of that regarding the census. I received some information in the mail from the census, and I've had quite a saga this year myself with the census. I actually have a post on my YouTube about it. And I ended up filling out the census online. I got a document that said you can fill it out, and it gives you your census ID number, and then you fill it out online. And I talked to the person who lives here as well, got his information. Then I submitted it online. And when you submit it online, they send you an electronic receipt. Now, I have that in my evidence, but the actual email of it has been deleted from my electronic records, and it has been for several months. They deleted the email response from the Department of the Census. But I took very detailed notes about the whole process around the census. I had witnessed an event locally regarding recruitment for the census volunteers. And I used to live with somebody who worked as a census taker for the 2010 census, and this was a very big part of what was going on at that time. So these are personal experiences I've had, and I had filed an online census. The receipt was deleted from my email, and somebody came to the door one day and wanted to do the census in person, and I declined. I answered a few introductory questions, but at the point where they said I could decline, I declined because I'd already filled it out online. And this is important. I filled it out online. I gave information about me, I gave information about him. I got a electronic receipt that had very detailed information about the transaction, including the amount of time I spent online at the Department of Commerce website. At the time, they sent me the receipt as well as a specific number that also correlated with the census ID on the paper documents. That information is not in my email anymore. Somebody else got that and did something with it. Now, I kept all the paper information. I made little, I time stamped it. And I got three different items in the mail relating to the census specifically, right? Document came once, and then another document came, and then there was a postcard. And I was tracking Treasury issues at this time, and I noticed that the information on the dates of these census, the dates these are dated for, correlated with a treasury bond issue. They're that precise when they came and were when it was issued, and then when I took the actual survey, it was the dates that they were distributed was that specific, because otherwise it's like, well, why would you send one with the same number in this amount of time from each other? There's a very short amount of time between the first mailing notice and the second mailing notice, I would have thought, unless you're correlating it with something else. And just so happens that the approval for the OMB number expired in on November 30th, which was right before December 1st, right? I'm sorry, it expires November 30th of next year. Not so ironically, November 30th of next year is very important in reference to another executive order, right? So I'm just acknowledging that because as I'm reading through the case argument, or the opinions, including the majority opinion and the dissenting opinion, this sort of information is very important. It's a 30-year bond. And that's just in terms of the mail documents that have a census ID number that correlate with an electronic transaction, the receipt for which I no longer have in my email. But I had to, because I kept it in my evidence, I have it in my evidence. But in terms of having that receipt for myself, I don't have it. Did the Census Bureau record it? And if the Census Bureau recorded it, then why did they dispatch someone who was on the clock and on the job to ask specifically for me on the day she asked for it, using a handheld electronic device to take the census from me a second time? Right? And today is December 18th. The announcement was made today. There's definitely very relevant references in the announcement made today to other things that have been going on in terms of these timelines. But additionally to that is the understanding that while this information was coming from the census, which is under the Department of the Commerce Department, there was also something very important that happened where there was a postcard concerning COVID-19. It's from the President Trump's coronavirus guidelines for America. And it's a postcard that has you can see it has the White House and it has the CDC. The date and correlation with this also correlates with that 30-year bond. Just so you know that they are timed correlatively. And more than that, there were certain other executive proclamations that happened around that time that could potentially be used in other manners, right? I'm not going to present the specifics about that, but one of the reasons I kept track of it in that manner is because it seemed like there were competing paradigms going on with the COVID-19 relief. I never got the electronic notice that comes in the mail because I signed up for that USPS mail delivery service where they give you pictures, they give you information about the mail that's coming. I track the mail, what they say is coming versus when it comes and if it doesn't come. And what ends up coming that wasn't tracked or wasn't electronically recorded. There was no electronic record for this postcard coming to the house. There was no electronic record, but there was other COVID-19 related information as well as other things connected to stuff being promoted by the USPS or being distributed through the USPS, including with direct graphic files. It wasn't a scan of the document. It was a direct graphic embedded into the email sent out as part of these notices around that time. And then there was other COVID-19, or in this case, coronavirus, because it was early, it was in March, right? There was other coronavirus relief that was under a completely different department that had comparable benchmarks. It was as if there was a competition even in March about which perspective was going to be able to get information about COVID-19 or about the coronavirus out to people so they could get it. And so I'm letting you know that I kept track of that. And I also kept track of the fact that at that time, there was a specific proclamation, suspension of entry as immigrants and non-immigrants of certain additional persons who pose a risk of transmitting 2019 novel coronavirus. This was dated for March 11th, 2020. It correlates with the information that was sent concerning the other aspect of this. It was as if it was a stagger, right? Stagger, we're going to get to that. And as if it were a stagger between the president's coronavirus and this stuff coming from the Department of Census. Uh, Not only that, but with the other COVID 19 or the other coronavirus relief information that was being sent, it was as if it was competing. And this has a very dissonant impact if you're talking about conveying accurate information, especially about a healthcare pandemic that is completely inappropriate, I believe, for election campaigning. But more than that, we're talking about actions that the federal government is taking. And I've said before, especially when it comes to 30-year bonds, that we've had a process in this country of increasing the number of 30-year bonds we issue on an annual basis. And there has been a certain number that has come due in the last few years. And nobody's gotten back to me to get verification of what I could have been doing as part of a capital outlay process to make sure that some of the outlays associated with those bonds were met. I met them. But if nobody gets back and confirms and allows for that to be acknowledged as credit or as completion, and then appropriately accounts for that and appropriately ascribes that, instead using it as a cost or using it as another form of outlay regarding some sort of emergency or disability, as opposed to actually meeting a long-term benchmark, including one that could have added value by completing something within a particular area of the government functioning, then you get a misrepresentation and disproportionate perspective of what's happening. And this apportionment of resources based upon the actual manner in which we participate in the political economy has a direct impact on the actual economy. So, in some ways, I'm not the only one that's doing this, right? Because these things all factor into that process. But the actual substantive aspects of what was brought up in that opinion and what was brought up over the course of that case, or I believe actually relevant to national security. This was a national security case. And part of what makes it a national security case is understanding the context. It wasn't as if there were potential perils that might occur. We were in the course of addressing a peril at that time. And in the course of addressing a peril at that time, there was a 30-year bond obligation that was placed. Just letting you know, I will do the best I can to attend to it. But we're also in the course of, again, I just want to emphasize, this is something we're going to have to deal with. We can't just talk about half pricing the individual relief that Congress wants to bond our stock to. But I'll get to that in another thing. The point being that, these things are directly correlated, and insofar as it might be evidentiary, because there's a need for somebody else that might be requesting response in terms of the immediacy addressed directly in that opinion from that perspective, you could consider this to be my response. And I will use it as evidence, and I have other evidence, and so I'm just letting you know. And now it's 9:04 p.m. on December 18th, 2020.